Welcome, Matt, to Metallarium Pages. It's a great pleasure to talk with you about Cryptopsy, this new album, The Unsettable Violence, and more things related to the metal world in general. So we are starting by asking, how are you doing today? How is the band during the last, during the last 2 years? Because your previous album was released in 2023 as Gomorrah's Burns.
We're doing great. Today's a good day. The album comes out in 2 days, so I've been living in this chair, doing a bunch of interviews back to back to back since 10 o'clock this morning. But I'm enjoying myself. I'm having a good time. We just got back from tour. I got back last week. We were gone for 6 weeks in Europe and the UK alongside Decapitated, Warbringer, and Carnation. It was a fantastic tour. The band is doing great. In the past few years, we've been touring a lot. As Gamora Burns was well received by the metal community, and we were excited to get out there and have opportunities to showcase it on the road. We toured alongside Death to All. We toured alongside Carnifex. We went to Asia. We did a headlining run. We've been very busy. We went to Latin America earlier this year. It's been a busy year, busy times for Cryptopsy.
Okay, I understand for this one. And when did you decide writing songs for this new album? It was during the previous sessions for the Asgamore's World because there is a too short time just for these two albums, or it was before or during or later.
We wrapped up As Gamora Burns. I feel like everything was finished probably around Christmas 2022 is when we finished everything for As Gamora Burns. We submitted it to Nuclear Blast, and then we fell into the cycle of when is it going to come out. So it came out September 2023. And then we toured As Gamora Burns a bunch, and we came up with this idea of we're going to drop an album every 2 years. A challenge, basically, because we've always wanted to release music more frequently to our fans. But things happen, challenges happen, members have children, obstacles happen, we tour. But this time around, we didn't let anything get in the way, and we forced ourselves to accomplish this task. In order to do so, we had to write the record on tour, which is something that we've never done before. And I'm not talking about like during sound check, writing and coming up with ideas. I'm talking about after shows, setting up in the tour bus, setting up the little computer and taking out the guitar and writing riffs. Or if we had a day off, we would load everything in to the hotel room. The guitars, that is, we wouldn't bring drums because then we wouldn't be able to stay. Um, and write riffs in the hotel room. So while everyone else on the tour package was resting and having fun at the hotel, we were in our room working, writing an insatiable violence. So it was uncomfortable, it was difficult, but as we're becoming very close to it coming out, it's extremely satisfying and gratifying that we accomplished this task that we set for ourselves, even though it wasn't easy and it was challenging at times.
Okay. Well, that's the next question because from a long time ago, usually, well, the first three albums from Cryptopsy are released each 2 years, 94, 96, 98. But since the last one, Whisper Supremacy, then the band decides to create just, or and then you'll back, the band releasing albums each 5 years, 3 years, 7 years.
Life happens, right? Like
Life.
if you think about how old they were
Mhm,
back in the 90s, they didn't have the responsibilities that we had
mhm,
we have now
mhm,
as older gentlemen that have children. So I know for myself during the 2010s, I had my kids. There
mhm,
was no way I was going to get away with touring and doing anything intensely as we are right now leaving my wife at home with a baby, two babies. So a lot of stuff happens. So yes, in the 90s they dropped albums extremely close together, but I
mhm,
imagine they were motivated. I imagine that they had less responsibilities than they did in the 2000s,
mhm.
and I imagine that they were motivated to create and push and do stretch the boundaries of what is extreme music.
Okay. Well, now talking about more about this new album. So now the previous one was released for the as With the cover art, it was did by Paolo Girardi. But
Yeah, he's
now this
amazing.
album is completely a different cover art, especially because usually just with this one is the third album that Cryptopsy doesn't put, or that's yes, Cryptopsy doesn't put the logo or the I don't know
The
the
bat,
mascot, the
the
pet,
the
the
bat.
pet.
Yes. There
But
was discussions. Yes. Paolo did a great job on As Gomorrah Burns. We this time around we wanted to honor Martin Lacroix, our old singer, who sang on None So Live. He was in the band in the early 2000s between Mike DeSalvo and Lord Worm. Wonderful human, an amazing artist, fantastic vocalist, wonderful human for sure. He passed away last year. So a way to honor him was to use one of his pieces of art on our cover. And in order to truly honor him, we didn't want to alter the artwork in any way, aside from adding the Cryptopsy logo and the album title. There were discussions internally. Some members wanted a bat to be put with the logo. Other members were like, I think it's really important to honor his painting the way that it is. But when we got all the pieces of his art that was still available from Martin's family, we all immediately gravitated towards the cover art, which is the cover art of Insatiable Violence. But there's another painting that we also commissioned that is a bat that is inside the CD. So
okay.
we got best of both worlds, but it's just not on the cover. So now the mascot, you can call the Cryptopsy mascot, the bat, the gargoyle, as Flo looks at him, is not there.
Okay, okay. Now talking about more about the goals for you. Usually, as you are on the band since the Unspoken King, that you entered to the band at that moment, and usually when you enter to the band at that moment, the band a lot of people because I'm sure the band since the beginning with Blasphemy Made It Flesh, Non So Vile, I was there. I was young at that moment, so but I remember very well that albums, great albums at that moment. But the people get mad. I remember got mad when the Unspoken King was released. So and
People
the
were very, very dissatisfied with the Unspoken King, but the thing that hindered the band the most is not the record. It's not the fact that I sang on it. It's not the fact that I did clean vocals on it. It's not the fact that Lord Worm was not the vocalist. The thing that hindered the band's reputation the most was the band's reaction to people not liking the record. We were far too aggressive, far too demeaning towards our fan base, and it has taken us over 15 years to regain the fans' trust and respect again because we were far too aggressive. Our reaction, our knee-jerk reaction of, oh, you don't like my record, F you, was the wrong approach. And I wish that Century Media, we were on Century Media at the time, their PR team, I wish that they had told us to stop. I wish that they had put us in line. I wish that they had said, hey, respect your fans a bit more because they're the one that put you here. I truly stand beside that had we had reacted differently, yes, people would have still hated the record, but they wouldn't have hated the band so much.
well, for me, it's not more like the thing related that I hate. The album's a great record. It's the same. It's Flomoni is like a great drummer using a way different like Worms, but not for me. For me, in that album, you changed completely the concept of I Cryptopsy because at that moment, I remember the last album, Once Was Not, it was a tremendous one. Like Lord Worm returned to the vocals, a lot of people get happy. I remembered all the drums. For me with this new album also, Cryptopsy it is like a savage music. It's not brutal. It's not savage music. And when the
Hmm.
Unspoken King is like the tendencies at that moment for the deathcore area, this kind of thing. That is what I think. For me, especially, I don't like that album so much. But
Well, we don't like that album, so it's not a Cryptopsy record. It's a very strange record. Had we released the record as a side project called The Unspoken King, and this was a self-titled record, let's say, the metal community would have accepted it much more. It's not a Cryptopsy record. It's weird. It's all over the place, and that's because John Levasseur left Cryptopsy while writing Once Was Not. They
Mhm,
picked up the pieces and finished Once Was Not,
mhm,
and The Unspoken King was the first record written with no clear leader that was defending the legacy of the band. It was pure creative ex- explorations, just trying to do different things. And I have to be grateful for the record because I wouldn't be in Cryptopsy now if it wasn't for that record. But I listened to it probably under a year ago. I went through the whole thing on like a Sunday, just sitting with my kids. And there's some cringy parts on that record.
Okay, okay. Now talking about this concept. So as you return and you enter to the band and with Spoken King, I will no that's no well no good no good album. But then once not it was a huge album because again Cryptopsy did it. I remember I read a lot of reviews for that once was not. The Return of the Beast, the Canada all the time, Cryptopsy, etc., etc. So now when you are playing a lot of gigs with the Cryptopsy, how do you handle the way of sing for Lord Worm compared to the way you sing because you have a different way to sing this Lord Worm. Lord Worm is more like classic stuff, and you have more approach with the guttural stuff.
Over the years, I've changed my technique performing Lord Worm vocals for sure. The switch happened in about 2017,
Mhm,
2018. 2018 is when I changed my vocal technique for Lord Worm songs to a pure false chord scream. We call it the Chris Bark.
mhm,
We were recording Tome 2. And I was walking back into the vocal booth after listening to tracks that I had done with Chris, and I just let out this scream. And Chris was like, "What is that? Why are we not using that voice? You should use that voice." So we used some of that voice on Tome 2, and then from that point on, me and Chris were like, "This voice is way better than your other voice." So I started using my false chord scream for Lord Worm parts, and I would use my normal technique for myself and Mike DeSalvo songs. And then the pandemic hit. And Chris and I discussed a lot throughout the pandemic that we were only going to use the false chord scream moving forward. So for As Gomorrah Burns, I recorded everything with my false chord scream. And then when I toured As Gomorrah Burns, the whole, like everything that I was doing differently before, I only used
mhm,
this newer technique, which is just my easiest go-to technique, actually. And I've just been using that since then. So I try to do Lord Worm songs justice. I try to do it in my own flair, while staying dirty and weird. I try to pronounce the words a bit more than Lord Worm because that's something that's important to me.
mhm,
And I'm trying to make Cryptopsy my own at this point.
mhm. Okay, okay. Well, yeah, for me it's a different. Yeah, the vocals is different. But everyone, I love the last album, the Inseparable Violence. For me, return to the old era for the Cryptopsy sound, like savage thing. That's one thing that
It is
I
very savage. It's
it's.
intense. We wanted, and we
Uh-huh.
care for and revere the worship of the, sorry, I was going to say worship, but I said revere instead. The legacy of Cryptopsy. The legacy of Cryptopsy is extremely important to us, and we handle it with care, and we do not want to take another misstep. And we know that we did, and we never want to go back to that. So we are always crafting things with that in our mind, that the legacy of Cryptopsy is precious, and we need to craft things that honor it while remaining relevant in 2025 alongside other metal bands.
Hmm. Okay, okay, nice, nice. Well, yeah. Well, for me, when you return with the Cryptopsy album, the homónimo album, that's a great album. Also. So at that moment, so well, obviously when Outspoken King was released, the Century Media at that moment left the contract with you because, as you said, it wasn't a great album. But then the
No, that they
Cryptopsy,
would have continued. We owed them another record, and we
uh-huh.
gave them the,
But
well, we don't like that album, so
mhm.
it's not a Cryptopsy record. It's a very strange record. Had we released the record as a side project called The Unspoken King, and this was a self-titled record, let's say, the metal community would have accepted it much more. It's not a Cryptopsy record. It's weird. It's all over the place, and that's because John Levasseur left Cryptopsy while writing Once Was Not. They
Mhm.
picked up the pieces and finished Once Was Not, and The Unspoken King was the first record written with no clear leader that was defending the legacy of the band. It was pure creative ex- explorations, just trying to do different things. And I have to be grateful for the record because I wouldn't be in Cryptopsy now if it wasn't for that record. But I listened to it probably under a year ago. I went through the whole thing on like a Sunday, just sitting with my kids. And there's some cringy parts on that record.
Okay, okay. Now talking about this concept. So as you return and you enter to the band and with Spoken King, I will no that's no well no good no good album. But then once not it was a huge album because again Cryptopsy did it. I remember I read a lot of reviews for that once was not. The Return of the Beast, the Canada all the time, Cryptopsy, etc., etc. So now when you are playing a lot of gigs with the Cryptopsy, how do you handle the way of sing for Lord Worm compared to the way you sing because you have a different way to sing this Lord Worm. Lord Worm is more like classic stuff, and you have more approach with the guttural stuff.
Over the years, I've changed my technique, performing Lord Worm vocals for sure. The switch happened in about 2017, 2018. 2018 is when I changed my vocal technique for Lord Worm songs to a pure false chord scream. We call it the Chris Bark. We were recording Tome 2. And I was walking back into the vocal booth after listening to tracks that I had done with Chris, and I just let out this scream. And Chris was like, "What is that? Why are we not using that voice? You should use that voice." So we used some of that voice on Tome 2. And then from that point on, me and Chris were like, "This voice is way better than your other voice." So I started using my false chord scream for Lord Worm parts, and I would use my normal technique for myself and Mike DeSalvo songs. And then the pandemic hit. And Chris and I discussed a lot throughout the pandemic that we were only going to use the false chord scream moving forward. So for As Gomorrah Burns, I recorded everything with my false chord scream. And then when I toured As Gomorrah Burns, the whole, like everything that I was doing differently before, I only used this newer technique, which is just my easiest go-to technique, actually. And I've just been using that since then. So I try to do Lord Worm songs justice. I try to do it in my own flair, while staying dirty and weird. I try to pronounce the words a bit more than Lord Worm because that's something that's important to me. And I'm trying to make Cryptopsy my own at this point.
Mm. Okay, okay. Well, yeah, for me it's a different. Yeah, the vocals is different. But everyone, I love the last album, the Inseparable Violence. For me, return to the old era for the Cryptopsy sound, like savage thing. That's one thing that
It is
I
very savage. It's
it's.
intense. We wanted, and we
Uh-huh.
care for and revere the worship of sorry, I was going to say worship, but I said revere instead. The legacy of Cryptopsy. The legacy of Cryptopsy is extremely important to us, and we handle it with care, and we do not want to take another misstep. And we know that we did, and we never want to go back to that. So we are always crafting things with that in our mind that the legacy of Cryptopsy is precious and we need to craft things that honor it while remaining relevant in 2025 alongside other metal bands.
Hmm. Okay, okay, nice, nice. Well, yeah. Well, for me, when you return with the Cryptopsy album, the homónimo album, that's a great album. Also. So at that moment, obviously when Outspoken King was released, the Century Media at that moment left the contract with you because, as you said, it wasn't a great album. But then the
No, that
Crypto,
they would have continued. We owed them another record and we
uh-huh.
gave them the Best of Us Bleed to finish the contract. And that was a decision from Cryptopsy, not from Century Media.
Oh, oh, okay, okay, okay. So and that, well, and that's when you released the Cryptopsy album. I remember that a lot of fans again happy again because Cryptopsy back to the roots, etc., etc. For that album. So, but at that moment, you decide to release that album independently first, and then released by another label. So, at that moment, why did you decide to release that album independently, and why you decide to call that album Cryptopsy as the name of the band?
Well, John came back. It's an amazing story. Is that Flo called John
Hmm.
Levasseur to come back into Cryptopsy, and John said, "No, I'm not ready," because he hadn't touched a guitar in 7 years. He left
Okay.
the band and put his guitar in his closet and never touched a guitar. 5 months later, he called Flo back and said, "I'm ready now." And then they started jamming, and they jammed for like 6 months, I want to say. And John had the album when he came. He had the songs in his head and he had to get them out. He's a musical savant, a genius. Um, so the fact that the band was back on the right track, it felt right to me to call it Cryptopsy, just as a statement as to we're back where the band is supposed to be. As for the independent side of things, I feel like we did it exactly at the right moment for that record.
Hmm.
The Book of Sufferings afterwards was not necessarily as easy, but back in 2012, you could put a post on Facebook and
Hmm.
hit all your fans with information. It was before Facebook started doing a lot of the more paid, ad-driven, algorithm-driven online stuff. So we had like seen there was a lot of bands that were doing more like indie pop stuff that was doing very well independently. I'd watched like a TED talk with some girl that I was like, maybe we could do this. And we presented it to the band. I'm saying we because it was me and my wife. Presented it to the band, and they were weary at first, but then they got into it, and it was actually a quite successful launch for the self-titled
Hmm.
because we could directly communicate with our fans via the internet. Whereas even it was 4 years later when we dropped the Book of Suffering Tome 1, there was already that algorithm, the paid algorithm that was already being implemented on Facebook, and we didn't necessarily have the funds to fuel the platforms in order to get all of our fans aware that we dropped the Book of Suffering EPs. So those were more difficult. Plus, EPs are hard. Some people just, I don't like EPs. I want more. It's
Me
true.
too. Me too. Me too.
I want an album. And I imagine the fans did too. So those didn't resonate as much to the fact where when we started touring as Gamora Burns at the merch table, people would be like, or all the interviews I did, people were like, so you haven't done anything since 2012. Why? I was like, no, we've done a lot. We released 2 EPs. That's releasing EPs in our mind was going to be less work, so we could release music quicker to our fans, which is always an aspiration that we have. But it didn't happen because it takes just about the same amount of time to write 4 songs than it does 8. So it was hard. It was hard being independent. The latter half of our independent phase, you can say, was far more financially straining and difficult. We are extremely happy to be back on record labels. So Nuclear Blast dropped as Gamora Burns, and now we have a great relationship with Season of the Mist for an Insatiable Violence, and they've also re-released a lot of the albums that we own the rights to. So Cryptopsy has a home now where we're going to stay for the foreseeable future. The relationship between us and them is beautiful so far. I feel extremely well taken care of.
Hmm. Okay, okay, okay. So now we're talking about, especially for this change of label, because as Gomorrah Burns, well, the previous one was released independently. Then as Gomorrah Burns was released with Knuckle Blast, and now we have the season with this new album with Season of Mist. So, and why you decide to change the label with
We
Nuclear
had
Blast?
signed it because Flo is uncertain after being independent for so long to commit to a multiple album deal. So we signed a 1 album deal to Nuclear Blast. We
Mhm.
fulfilled that with As Gamora Burns. We had begun conversations with them to continue the relationship because we wanted a home. We wanted a label where we could re-release Ungentle Exhumation, Blasphemate Flesh. None So Vile, the self-titled, and the tomes, because we own the rights to them. We wanted to re-license them and re-release them to the worlds because being independent, sometimes you don't have the funds to print vinyls and have them and ship them out and have them be available to everyone. So there was like a scarcity of some of these records that no one has ever gotten their hands on. So that was like another pitfall as to being independent. So we wanted to continue the relationship with Nuclear Blast. Sadly, we didn't see eye to eye business-wise. And as soon as that conversation closed, Flo immediately called Michael from Season the Mist. He had a great relationship with Michael with his time working with Ultimass. And within the first phone call, I think it was 2 months, we had a signed record deal.
Oh, okay, okay. Interest point to be. Okay, I didn't know that. Now, well, more talking about more the promotion of this new album. So why, also, what kind of plans do you have? I saw that you will embark a tour with Nile and other bands more. And what kind of plans do you have for this unsettable violence? Perhaps you present more videos, you release, perhaps. So, what kind of plans do you have in general for this new album and the band
Sure. Well,
album?
we did a whole bunch of stuff already promoting it. Today we actually posted the final one. Flo had this crazy idea of creating little short clips, teasers. We'll call them teasers, just for the sake of people understanding. So we chose a section from each song from the track and created a teaser section. And then we filmed basically a short film that is cut up into 8 pieces. And we presented these pieces to the public over 2 months as a way to promote the new record. But when you look at all 8 of them together, it flows seamlessly, almost as a song, which is interesting too, to take
Mhm.
parts from each song and then fit them together was a feat for Christian Donaldson. He had to figure out how to make that happen, but he did. And the concept behind it is about like a social media influencer that's slowly losing their grip on reality. So today we dropped the final eighth reel, which is a little clip from Malicious Needs. And we're going to premiere within the next week or so the full short video of all of these teasers stacked together. So that was one thing that we did to promote the record. We created very cool music videos. Until There's Nothing Left was filmed by my good friend Chris Kells, who also filmed the whole short teaser, short film idea. And there's this crazy video for Malicious Needs, which was ungodly censored by YouTube because it was just too out there. That was created by he's a wacky dude. Gornos, he's this French director. He took my concept for the record, my concept for the song Malicious Needs, and then twisted it into something far more bizarre. And it basically could be expanded into like a Black Mirror episode, which is something that I'm a big fan of. A dystopian future, something that is just close. It could happen in like the next few weeks or so, next few years or so, something that we're not that far off. So we've done that. We have tours coming up. As you mentioned, we're touring the United States with Nile, the last 10 seconds of life. Cognitive, we are going back to Japan. We are going to New Zealand. We are going to Australia. There will be no more dates announced around that tour. And we have big plans for 2026. We're basically booked almost about a year in advance at this point. So, it's going to be a busy time for Cryptopsy, and that makes us happy and excited because there's nothing better than standing on stage and connecting with crowd, over the shared love of extreme music.
Okay, amazing, amazing. So, and now talking about the live presentations. So, Cryptopsy arrived last year to South America or Latin America,
Yeah,
Mexico, Chile,
it was
Colombia,
very
and
cool.
countries. So, in this for this situation, how it was the reception from this last tour here in Latin America, and for you, which was the best country to
Sure.
just to
Yeah,
hang with
sure.
the tour?
We had a great, great, great tour. Shout out to Victor from Chamuco Productions. I've toured Latin America a few times. I've toured Mexico more than other places. It tends to be a tad disorganized. This time around, it was not. Victor and Chamuco Productions were fantastic. So if you're in a death metal band and you want to go tour Latin America, Chamuco Productions is what you want to be working with. It was fantastic. We kicked it off in Chile, and Chile is special. The crowds are intense. It was probably the one of the biggest shows of the tour. Very, very intense crowd waiting for us at the hotel, at the airport. It's a surreal experience. There's only a few places in the world that that happens, like Japan
Mhm.
and Latin America. But it was fantastic. That was super, super cool. And plus, we were on tour with Atheist, who we had just toured Europe with last year. We're all friends. We were all suffering together, the lack of sleep, the flying every day. It was great. Chile was amazing. Costa Rica was amazing because we teamed up with Soen. That's right. There was a Cryptopsy and Soen show in Costa Rica, which doesn't make sense, but and the Soen crowd didn't necessarily understand us, but it was fun. There was a big, big amount of people there. They weren't necessarily there for us, but they put up with us, and we had fun. We had a day off in Costa Rica, which was amazing. We enjoyed Mexico. Mexico was great. Mexico City is always a blast. It was great. We had a wonderful time. The crowds were intense, passionate, and we ate good food.
Amazing, amazing, amazing. Now talking about one of we are close to this interview, Matt, and one question I want to ask you about this one, because since the beginning I don't know why Cryptopsy has all the time lineup changes. Just Flow is the one of the last members since 1988 when the band's obsessive compulsion disorder, that name, the first name of the band at that moment. But now then the band changing, and you said when the Unspoken King was released, then John returned for the Cryptopsy album. And for this, but then John decided to not release these as Gomorrah Bones with you, decide to retire again. New
John,
members.
John quit. John quit right after we released the
So
self-title.
great. And for this one, so why the band? Well, now you have a more stable lineup. That is a good thing. But do you ask, for example, for money, why all the time just the members of the Cryptopsy are go
Sure. Yeah.
out
Well,
there?
it's not easy being in a death metal band.
Mhm.
It's not an easy thing to turn to your work or your partner and say, "Hey, I'm going on a 6 week tour. You handle this. I got to go do that." And then crawl into a van. Back in the day, they were in a van. Crawl
Mhm.
into a van and hypothetically come home with less money than they would have made if they would have stayed at their job.
Mhm.
It's not easy being in a death metal band. It's not like we're making lots and lots and lots of money. So it was, and people change and people evolve, people have kids, life happens, people fight, arguments break out, people don't necessarily enjoy touring because it's just not in their personality. Luckily for us, Ollie, Chris, Flo, and myself were the longest standing Cryptopsy lineup.
Mhm.
We love each other. We fight, we talk it out, we do everything for the benefit of the band. Our families and everyone around us support us so that we can continue this dream. The band is 30 plus years into its career, finally gets its first decibel cover.
Mhm.
We're in it together. We're riding to the moon and we're supporting each other and we're pushing this as hard as we can at this exact moment because Flo is 50 years old. How many more years can he play at the level of intensity that he has to?
Mhm. Well,
We're in it to the end. We're pushing hard.
okay, yeah, that is true, and that's my next question. So, well, when I hear for the first time Cryptopsy, what I remember with the demo on Gentle Animation, I will blow my mind at that moment because that demo is so amazing, so incredible. And when released Blast with Made Flesh, I hear for the first time the Gravity Blast beats. Now a lot of drummers do them. Better than Flow, but I don't care about this. Flow introduced that Gravity Blast beat into the death metal, and I saw her techniques or her DVD book. I remember
Yeah,
to
yeah. He was one of the first to do that too.
Yes, it
There's a
was.
lot of things that Flo was the first doing, which is very
Yes,
interesting if you think
yes.
about it over the years.
Yeah, yeah. I remember that. I spoke with a lot of people saying that no, he doesn't play like the new bad drummers. I don't care because I was there. I hear the first time the Gravity Blast Beat in one of the songs for Blasphemy Made in Flesh. So now you please when you rewrote that influence from Cryptopsy or from Flemony, please call me. That's the one thing I said all the time. But in these situations, how is for you to be in a band with Floymony? Because Floymony for me is one of the last 10 drummers into the death metal scene around the world that changed the rules of the drummer of the
You're
death
right.
metal
Yeah.
drummer.
Yeah, hell yeah. You know what? My ears hurt. That's you know why? Because he hits so goddamn hard, because he hits for real. If you
Yes.
watch all these new modern extreme drummers, they hardly even touch anything. There's exceptions. There's some really good drummers out there, obviously. But no, he takes his craft extremely seriously. He is constantly examining the physicality of what he needs to do drum wise. So he does specific workouts with resistant training bands, squats, lunges, in order to prepare his body to be able to do what he needs to do every night. And he has like techniques that he comes up with to fall back on if he's certain things are struggling, let's say. He has ways of adapting, but then the next day he's going to be like, what happened there? Why was there this lactic acid buildup in this one section of the song? How can I adjust that? He is very aware physicality of what he needs to do in order to continue drumming at this level for the next few years. The question is, how much longer can his body keep up with his mind? That's something that we are aware of, we're watching, we're keeping track of. Um, Hypothetically, we'll have to put more days off on tours to give him the ability to rest a little bit so that he can come back and still perform at the level he needs to. But he is crushing on all cylinders right now. Like to be like this long into your career and then over the past, I think it's under 10 years that he developed the swivel technique, which makes incredibly fast bass drums, which a lot of the young drummers are doing nowadays. Flo picked that up, like to be like an old dog, teaching old dogs new tricks tends to be a difficult thing, but not for Flo Mounier. So no, it's an honor, it's a pleasure to be with him. He hits really hard. My ears, I always have to take good care of my ears because he hits.
Okay. Okay. Now, one of the last questions for this interview, Matt, is well, because all the time when I hear for the first times for the first bands from the 80s from in Canada, the curious thing is that also you play in a super technical band. For me, it's not technical death metal, it's brutal death metal. For it's not, I don't consider the Cryptopsy as technical.
We don't care about the label. We're Cryptopsy, and
Mhm.
Flo's been saying it for years. We're extreme music. Morbid
Mhm.
Angel say that too, but it's okay.
Okay, in this situation, so now why always the bands from Canada since the beginning, since obviously since Rush, always lean down to the progressive or the technical stuff? I don't know
I
what
think
for
I
you.
have a great question. I know I have an answer for this. It's what happened in Quebec is special because in the 70s, here in Quebec, we have I'll call it colleges, but it's not a college. It's called a CEGEP. So after you finish high school, you go to CEGEP, which is a 3-year, 2-year moment where you go and you try out stuff and you decide what you want to do in college. Most of the CEGEPs had auditoriums, stages, theaters in the school. So what happened in the 70s is that all the UK progressive rock bands toured Quebec. So yes, came and toured Quebec in these CJEPs. So all these musicians that were growing up, Piggy from Voivod was going to these shows and being exposed to all this progressive music. At the same time, in Quebec, there's a bunch of biker bars back in the day where there was heavy blues rock, and Piggy was still going to those shows as well. So you mix that and that together, and you get Voivod.
Mhm. Correct.
And then that becomes an influence and that just keeps going. So that's where it comes from. And then there's the heavy sense of competition between one another. Friendly. We love each other. Like Cataclysm, Cryptopsy, Gorguts, all friends. But back in the day, there was this, oh, you're going that fast? I'm going to do this. Gorguts was like, well, I'm going to be more fucked up. It was just this cycle of things of influencing each other, pushing each other, watching certain people succeed in certain things and being jealous and wanting yours and then getting your opportunity, taking people out. I think Cryptopsy took Gorguts out on a tour back in the day. I feel like I'm right about that. Um, and that's where it all comes from. And then in modern era now, we're very, very lucky in Montreal that Montreal is a tour stop. If you're touring North America, bands will hit Montreal. They'll hit Vancouver, they'll hit Toronto, and they'll hit Montreal. The rest of Canada sadly gets nothing. A little bit more recently, but for a while it was just that. You're doing a North American tour, you play 3 shows in Canada. Montreal was one of them. So there was this amazing venue called the Medley, where a lot of people went and saw touring bands come through. And when you see things, it unlocks things in your brain and it makes it possible. You understand visually what they're doing. Because back in the day, there was no YouTube tutorials. You had to go
Yeah.
to the show and learn these things. You saw it was possible. That's another aspect as to why Montreal is such a hotbed for bands. The other option, the other thing that made a big, big difference was there's this amazing band practice location called Cité 2000, which is also started by Voivod,
Mhm.
um, that all the bands jammed it. So, and when you jam there, the isolation is not the best, so you can hear everyone else jamming when you're not playing.
Mhm.
So there's this, and then you're walking around, and I remember being a kid jamming at Cité. It's called Cité 2000. I remember jamming there and seeing Cryptopsy members walk by and be like, oh, that's Alex from Cryptopsy. And like be like, like we jam at the same place. It makes it obtainable.
Hmm.
So the dream is not that far. You
Okay.
could become a touring musician. So it's all of that, all mixed together. And the winters, because we have nothing else to do.
Oh, okay. Okay. Nice. Nice. Well, Matt, we arrived to the sad moment of this interview. I hope you enjoyed this one like me. This album's a great one. I just did my pre-order. I hope to arrive
Yes.
soon. Well, congratulations on it. Perhaps you want to add something to your Latin American fans and Metallerium followers.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, everyone, for taking the time watching the interview. Check out the new record, Insatiable Violence. It came out June 20th. Season the Mist. We're very proud of it. I was lying in bed thinking I should go back to Latin America next year. That's a true thing. I was thinking that. So I hope to come back next year and share an Insatiable Violence with all of you.